As for the military aspects of the war, after the initial invasion of Poland, which was called Operation Tannenberg, had ended, many people called this the phony war because nothing happened after that, at least in terms of other invasions in the early stages. Um, Although Britain and France both declared war on Germany for invading Poland, they didn't have the resources or the ability, or at least the seemingly the ability to attack Germany head on. So war is declared and Poland falls, but then nothing happens, and people come to this sense that, oh well, maybe wide scale war has been avoided because nothing's going on at this point. Poland has fallen. Well, that's all going to change in the spring of 1940, and Hitler turns his attention east. So not only is he's going to redress the Treaty of Versailles in the east, he's going to make for territory in the west. Part of that is recovering this area of Alsace and Lorraine, which was highly contestable. In 1870s, it came under German or Prussian control, and it was regained by the French again following World War One. So Germany's going to head west. What is surprising, even to Hitler's armed forces, is that unlike World War One, which was not a war of movement, which was a static war, in World War Two, the plans of striking westward happened with movement. This blitzkrieg kind of had broken up that past pattern of being stuck in trenches. So in the spring of 1940, Germany attacks France, Belgium, and Holland, and within a few weeks, these countries fall to Hitler's power. And this is the most shocking aspect of the war to most people in the West. France, which is considered a major power in Europe, although the French themselves did not consider themselves a major power, but the world viewed them as a major military power, fell extremely quickly to Nazi blitzkrieg. And there's a lot of people who blame various reasons why this happened. How did France fall in a few weeks? Some blame their concentration of forces at an area known as the Maginot Line, which was this area of fortifications between Germany and France, which Hitler virtually just went around. Some people blame the French leadership for being too slow to react to the blitzkrieg. There was evidence of what Germany's new warfare was like by watching what happened in Poland. But some people blame the French military leadership for not heeding those warnings of what happened. So when Germany struck, much of the French military aircraft, for example, was unable to get off the ground that day. The planes were attacked in the airfields and never made it up. We didn't have the technology, or the Allies didn't have the technology in the early days that you would expect. For example, radar. Some radar is going to be developed maybe a year or so later, so there's no warning that the aircraft are coming. There are those who would argue that the French wanted peace and didn't want this war, and were willing to lay their arms down very quickly to this vast, quick movement by the Nazis. These things can be argued, and if you're a military historian, you can read up on the various battles and such and what went wrong. But whatever your conclusions as to why it happened, what did happen is that France fell. And there was a lot of British equipment in France during the time period. Because although they had not attacked Germany, there was this expectation that a war would begin again in France against Germany, like they happened in World War One. So there was a lot of British military equipment and British personnel in France. And as the French forces retreated very quickly, the British forces were caught up in this retreat as well. and they tried to get as much equipment out as they could, but basically much was left and captured by the Germans. And one of the largest retreats across sea happened in May of 1940. Operation Dunkirk was to get these British military personnel, and as much as the French military personnel as well, out of France to try and save some of the French army and the French military and British military equipment. And basically any boat they could commandeer, little fishing vessels and local boats were taken over, and try to get as many soldiers out as possible. And that at that point, all hope is really lost. France has fallen. Its neighbor states are unable to offer really any resistance as well. Hitler has made a pact with Italy. Spain is considered neutral, but is a fascist state. The Republic had fallen. Now France was under German control. So the whole pattern of what Europe looked like at this time period comes very close to looking like at the time of Napoleon, when Napoleon controlled the continent. And this is the state in 1940 that Hitler is in control. And to the dismay of the British, Hitler sets his sights on Britain as well. And he begins aerial attacks of Britain and London in later that spring and early summer of 1940. This is known as the Battle of Britain. And although there's a lot of heroism and such attached with Britain's behavior to survive these aerial attacks, the fact remains that the reason that the Nazis were unable to defeat the British, at least in this early stage, was that their military aircraft could only fly so far, and the planes that they had, the range of the planes made it so that by the time they get to Britain, they're already in need of fuel, so they can make a quick bombing run or whatever and then have to turn around. So there's not much time for fighting, really. And this is the same problem that Britain had in trying to defend France when the Germans invaded. The British would send aircraft over from London or bases outside of London, and by the time they reached France, they almost had to really need to turn around at that point to make it back home. So really the logistics of aircraft is a major factor as to why Germany is unable to defeat Britain, at least in this stage. The attacks against Britain only, the major attacks go on for a few months, the summer of 1940, but then they retreat from this, although there are attacks are going to happen after that, but the major ones stop really after the summer of 1940. Hitler realizes that it's not going to happen. They don't have the equipment, they don't have the power, and they don't control the seas to make it happen. So all is quiet for a little bit again in 1940. Hitler will then turn his sights in 1941 towards the Soviet Union. And he expects that what happened in the East in Poland will continue in the Soviet Union. In Operation Barbarossa, 146 divisions, a huge force of men and equipment, are sent towards Russia in 3 separate groups: Operation North, Central, and South.